The most dangerous invitation is the one sent by someone who thinks they already know how your story ends. Olivia Carter stared at the cream-colored envelope resting on her kitchen table while the late afternoon sun filtered through the window above the sink. Outside, children rode bicycles along the quiet street, and a lawn mower hummed somewhere in the distance. Inside, everything felt strangely still. The envelope had arrived that morning. Heavy cardstock. Expensive printing. Her name written across the front in elegant black lettering. Olivia Carter. Not Mrs. Carter. Not Olivia Hayes. Just Olivia Carter. She already knew who had sent it before opening it. Ryan Carter. Her ex-husband. 5 years had passed since the divorce. 5 years since she had walked away from the Carter family with 2 suitcases, a broken heart, and more questions than answers. During those years, the rumors had never completely disappeared. Some people believed she had failed. Others assumed she had vanished because she could not survive on her own. The Carter family had certainly done nothing to correct those stories. Olivia slowly opened the envelope and unfolded the invitation inside. The annual Carter Foundation Gala. Saturday. 7 o'clock. Grand Regency Ballroom. At the bottom, a handwritten note appeared in familiar ink. I hope life has been kind to you. Ryan. Olivia read the sentence twice. Then she laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because she understood exactly what it meant. Across town, Ryan Carter stood beneath crystal chandeliers inside the Grand Regency Ballroom while event planners rushed around him. Waiters adjusted table settings. Florists arranged centerpieces. A light band rehearsed near the stage. Everything looked perfect. Just the way Ryan liked it. You really invited her? His mother Vanessa asked as she stepped beside him. Ryan accepted a glass of sparkling water and smiled. Of course. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. After all these years? Especially after all these years. He glanced around the room. Business leaders. Local politicians. Community influencers. Nearly everyone important would be there. People love a reunion story. Vanessa laughed knowingly. And if she actually comes? Ryan shrugged. Then everyone gets to see exactly how far we have both come. His confidence drew a smile from several relatives nearby. Nobody questioned what he meant. They all remembered Olivia. The quiet woman who never seemed ambitious enough. Never glamorous enough. Never successful enough. Back in her modest home, Olivia folded the invitation and placed it beside a framed family photograph. 3 smiling children stared back from the picture. At that moment, small footsteps echoed down the hallway. Mom, a young voice called. Olivia turned as 3 children appeared almost simultaneously in the kitchen doorway. Identical smiles. Identical bright eyes. Triplets. They immediately noticed the invitation lying on the table. One of them pointed toward it. Is that the party? Olivia looked at them and smiled gently. Yes. Another child tilted her head. Are we really going? Olivia's gaze drifted briefly toward the window. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and orange. Then she looked back at her children. Calm. Certain. Unshaken. Yes, she said softly. Some truths deserve witnesses. None of them realized it yet, but by the time that gala ended, an entire room full of people would discover just how wrong they had been about Olivia Carter. The next morning began like hundreds of mornings before it. Olivia stood in the kitchen pouring orange juice while 3 voices competed for attention at the breakfast table. Mom, I cannot find my science project. Mom, he took my marker. Mom, are pancakes considered breakfast or dessert? Olivia smiled despite herself. The house was not large. It was not luxurious. The cabinets had been painted twice. The hardwood floor carried years of scratches and memories. Yet every corner felt warm. Lived in. Loved. She moved between the stove and the table with practiced ease, setting plates down as sunlight streamed through the windows. To anyone looking from the outside, her life appeared ordinary. Maybe even difficult. A single mother raising 3 children. A modest home. A used SUV parked in the driveway. Nothing about her circumstances suggested success. Nothing suggested power. That assumption had protected her for years. After dropping the children at school, Olivia drove across town to a community center tucked between a library and a small public park. The building served families facing difficult times. Some needed tutoring. Some needed meals. Some simply needed someone willing to listen. Olivia greeted people by name as she walked through the doors. Volunteers smiled when they saw her. Parents waved. A young boy ran over carrying a drawing he had been working on all week. "Miss Olivia, look." She crouched beside him and studied the colorful sketch. "That is incredible." His face lit up immediately. Throughout the day she moved from room to room helping wherever she was needed. No cameras followed her. No reporters interviewed her. No one applauded. She preferred it that way. During lunch, one of the volunteers sat beside her. "I heard about the Carter Gala this weekend." Olivia looked up from her coffee. "News travels fast." The volunteer shook her head. "Everyone knows why Ryan invited you." Olivia smiled politely but said nothing. "You are not actually thinking about going, are you?" the woman asked. Olivia stirred her coffee slowly. Around them, conversations filled the room. Children laughed in a nearby classroom. Somewhere down the hall, someone was practicing piano. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. "I am going," Olivia said. The volunteer stared at her. "Why?" Olivia looked through the window toward the playground outside. "Because sometimes people spend years believing a lie." "And?" Olivia's expression softened. "And eventually the truth deserves a chance to walk into the room." Later that afternoon, she returned home and found another envelope waiting on the kitchen counter. This one had no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping announcing Ryan Carter as the keynote speaker at the upcoming gala. Across the bottom, someone had written a short note in blue ink. "He still thinks he won." Olivia read the sentence once and folded the clipping carefully. She did not look angry. She did not look hurt. If anything, she seemed thoughtful. Through the front window she watched her children running across the yard after school, their laughter carrying through the warm spring air. Then her phone vibrated. A single text message appeared on the screen. "Saturday. Everything is ready." Olivia looked at the message, then toward her children. A small smile touched her lips. The people waiting at that gala thought they knew exactly who would walk through those doors. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of sunshine that made everything look deceptively simple. Olivia stood in front of the bathroom mirror fastening a small silver earring while voices drifted through the hallway. "Mom, he took my backpack." "I did not take it. I moved it." "Mom, can we stop arguing for one whole day?" Olivia smiled at her reflection. Some things never changed. She stepped into the hallway and found all 3 children standing there. Their identical expressions immediately made her laugh. "What?" she asked. One of them crossed his arms. "You are nervous." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" Another pointed toward her. "You always fix your earring twice when you are nervous." She reached up instinctively and touched the earring. The children burst into laughter. "See?" Olivia shook her head and laughed with them. A few hours later, the house settled into a rare moment of quiet. The children were finishing homework at the dining room table while Olivia organized a few documents inside a leather folder. She paused when her eyes landed on an old photograph tucked between the pages. Ryan and Olivia standing together outside a courthouse years ago. Young. Hopeful. Certain they would build a future together. She stared at it for several seconds before sliding it back into the folder. There was no anger in her expression. Only acceptance. Some chapters ended because they were supposed to. The sound of a vehicle pulling into the driveway interrupted her thoughts. Through the front window she saw a black luxury SUV stop near the curb. Moments later, a tall man stepped out wearing a charcoal suit. Alexander Hayes. Even from a distance, there was an unmistakable confidence about him. Not arrogance. Calm certainty. The kind that came from knowing exactly who he was. The children spotted him immediately. Chairs scraped against the floor as they rushed toward the door. By the time Olivia opened it, Alexander was already smiling. "Good afternoon." 3 young voices answered at once. "Hi, Alex." He laughed. "Good afternoon to you too." Olivia stepped outside. "You are early. Traffic reports suggested tonight might be interesting." His eyes carried a hint of amusement. "I prefer being prepared." Olivia nodded. "So do I." For a moment they stood together beneath the bright afternoon sky. Anyone watching from across the street would have seen nothing unusual. A woman. 3 children. A well-dressed man visiting before an event. Ordinary. Yet beneath the surface, something much larger was quietly taking shape. Alexander glanced toward the children playing near the front porch. Then his attention returned to Olivia. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" The question hung in the air. Olivia looked down the street where sunlight reflected off parked cars and neatly trimmed lawns. 5 years earlier, she might have walked away. 5 years earlier, she might have allowed people to keep believing whatever story made them comfortable. But not anymore. She looked back at Alexander. Her voice remained calm. "I am not going for revenge." Alexander studied her expression carefully. "Then why are you going?" Olivia smiled softly. "Because my children deserve a world where the truth is not afraid to show its face." Alexander nodded once. No further explanation was needed. As the afternoon shadows slowly lengthened across the neighborhood, neither of them realized that by sunset, one question would leave an entire ballroom speechless. As evening settled over the city, the Grand Regency Ballroom transformed into exactly the kind of spectacle Ryan Carter loved. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead. White linen covered dozens of tables. A string quartet played softly near the stage while servers moved through the crowd carrying trays of sparkling drinks. Guests arrived in designer gowns and tailored suits, greeting one another with practiced smiles and polished conversation. Near the entrance, a massive banner displayed the Carter Foundation logo beside Ryan's name. Everywhere he looked, people were congratulating him. Investors shook his hand. Local officials praised his charitable work. Business owners laughed at his jokes. Ryan accepted every compliment as though it belonged there. Across the room, Vanessa Carter stood with a group of friends near the champagne bar. "Do you really think she will come?" one woman asked. Vanessa smiled confidently. "Curiosity always wins." Another guest laughed. "I heard she lives in a small house on the edge of town." "That is what happens when people make bad decisions," Vanessa replied. Several people nodded. The assumptions flowed easily. Nobody questioned them. Nobody challenged them. The version of Olivia Carter they carried in their minds had remained frozen for years. A failed marriage. A difficult life. A woman left behind. Ryan glanced toward the ballroom entrance for what felt like the 10th time that hour. "You are looking for her," one executive teased. Ryan laughed. "Not exactly." "Then why do you keep checking the door?" Ryan swirled the drink in his hand. "I am curious." The executive smirked. "Curious whether she still blames you?" Ryan shrugged. "Maybe." In truth, he was not worried. He had spent years believing he understood how the evening would unfold if Olivia showed up. She would arrive quietly. People would whisper. Comparisons would happen naturally. Then the night would move on. At least that was the story he expected. Near the stage, a television reporter adjusted her microphone while preparing a short segment about the gala. Camera crews moved carefully through the crowd. Photographers captured images of prominent guests arriving. The event was becoming one of the most talked about social gatherings of the year. Outside, darkness settled over the city as luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway leading to the ballroom entrance. Valets hurried from car to car. Flashbulbs popped. Guests posed briefly before disappearing inside. Back in the ballroom, conversations continued flowing until a sudden movement near the entrance caused several people to glance toward the doors. Then more people looked. Then nearly everyone. The reporter lowered her microphone. The musician stopped playing mid-song. Ryan noticed the shift immediately. He turned toward the entrance and frowned. Through the towering glass doors, headlights appeared beyond the fountain outside. Not one vehicle. Something much larger. Slowly, an impossibly long black limousine rolled into view beneath the lights of the grand entrance. The vehicle seemed to stretch forever. Conversations died almost instantly. Guests exchanged confused looks. Even the photographers repositioned themselves. Ryan stared toward the entrance, his confidence wavering for the first time all evening. Beside him, Vanessa frowned. Who on earth is that? Nobody had an answer. Outside, the limousine came to a smooth stop directly in front of the red carpet. The engine fell silent. Hundreds of eyes fixed on the vehicle. Then the rear passenger door began to open. The rear door of the limousine opened slowly, and every person near the entrance leaned forward in anticipation. Ryan felt his pulse quicken. Beside him, Vanessa folded her arms confidently, certain that whoever emerged would simply add another wealthy donor to the evening. But the first person to step onto the red carpet was not a business executive. It was a child. A young boy wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. The crowd immediately fell silent. Cameras flashed. Photographers exchanged confused looks. Then a second child stepped out. A little girl in a pale blue dress with long blonde hair and the same bright eyes as the boy. The silence deepened. Guests began whispering. Ryan frowned. "What is this?" he muttered. Before anyone could answer, a third child emerged from the limousine. Another young boy. Identical age. Identical smile. Identical posture. The realization spread through the crowd like a wave. Triplets. 3 children now stood side by side beneath the lights of the entrance, looking remarkably calm despite hundreds of eyes fixed upon them. The television reporter lowered her microphone entirely. Even the musicians inside the ballroom had abandoned their instruments to watch through the glass doors. "Whose children are those?" someone whispered. "I have no idea." "Are they part of the event?" Nobody seemed to know. The 3 children glanced toward the limousine as though waiting for someone. Then one of them smiled. A moment later, a graceful hand appeared at the edge of the open door. Ryan's expression tightened instantly. Vanessa stopped breathing for a second. Olivia stepped out onto the red carpet. The transformation was impossible to ignore. She wore a simple but elegant ivory evening gown that reflected the lights around her. Her blonde hair rested neatly across her shoulders. Her posture radiated confidence. Not arrogance. Not revenge. Confidence. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are. The crowd stared openly. Several guests failed to hide their shock. This was not the woman they expected. This was not the struggling ex-wife they had spent years imagining. Olivia looked toward her children and smiled warmly. One of the boys reached for her hand. The little girl adjusted her dress and stood proudly beside her. The image was so natural and effortless that it only deepened the confusion among the guests. Inside the ballroom, Ryan felt the first crack appear in the version of the evening he had carefully constructed in his mind. "What is she doing here with those children?" Vanessa whispered. Ryan did not answer. Because he did not know. Outside, photographers surged forward. Flashbulbs exploded across the entrance. Questions began flying from every direction. Olivia ignored them all. She simply guided the children forward. Then another movement near the limousine captured everyone's attention. A polished black dress shoe appeared beside the open door. Conversation stopped again. One guest dropped his champagne glass onto a serving tray without even noticing. Another stepped closer to the window. The television reporter stared toward the entrance with widening eyes. Slowly, a tall man stepped out of the limousine. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then someone near the front entrance gasped. "That cannot be him." Another guest immediately recognized him. Ryan's face turned pale. Because standing beside Olivia and the triplets was one of the most recognizable billionaires in America. Alexander Hayes had just arrived at the Carter Gala. For several seconds, the entire entrance stood frozen. The sight of Alexander Hayes beside Olivia Carter seemed to short-circuit every expectation in the room. This was not a local businessman. This was not a wealthy investor from a neighboring city. Alexander Hayes was the founder of one of the largest technology companies in the country, a billionaire whose name regularly appeared on magazine covers and financial news broadcasts. Yet there he stood, calm and composed, beside the woman everyone had spent years underestimating. Olivia glanced toward him and smiled. The gesture was small but natural. Comfortable. Familiar. The kind of smile shared between people who trusted each other. That single detail seemed to create even more confusion. Inside the ballroom, guests immediately began whispering. "How does she know him? That is Alexander Hayes. There is no way this is a coincidence." Ryan stared through the glass entrance doors as though trying to convince himself he was seeing someone else. But the reality remained unchanged. Alexander placed a reassuring hand near one of the children's shoulders and guided them toward the entrance. The triplets walked confidently beside him, completely unbothered by the attention surrounding them. Cameras flashed non-stop. Reporters rushed toward the doorway. The television crew abandoned their original coverage plans entirely. Suddenly, the most important story of the evening was no longer Ryan Carter's gala. It was Olivia Carter's arrival. Vanessa stepped closer to her son. "What is happening?" she whispered. Ryan swallowed hard. "I do not know." It was the first honest answer he had given all night. Moments later, the ballroom doors opened. Olivia entered first with the 3 children beside her. Alexander followed calmly behind them. Conversation stopped instantly. Hundreds of eyes followed every step they took across the polished marble floor. Olivia remained perfectly composed. She greeted a few familiar faces with polite smiles and continued walking. The triplets stayed close beside her, looking around with curiosity rather than fear. Alexander seemed completely unaffected by the attention. He moved through the room with quiet confidence, occasionally smiling at the children whenever they pointed towards something interesting. One of the board members from the Carter Foundation approached Ryan. "You did not mention Alexander Hayes would be attending." Ryan forced a smile that looked painful. "I was not aware he would be." The board member frowned. "Perhaps you should have been." Nearby, several business leaders had already gathered around Alexander. Handshakes were exchanged. Respect was obvious. Even people who had ignored Olivia's existence for years now found themselves watching her closely. Then came the moment nobody expected. One of the triplets spotted a dessert display across the ballroom. "Mom, look," the little girl exclaimed excitedly. Her voice carried farther than she intended. Dozens of heads turned. Not because she spoke. Because of the word she used. "Mom." The guests looked at Olivia. Then at the 3 children. Then back again. The similarities suddenly became impossible to ignore. The same eyes. The same smile. The same blonde hair. Questions began spreading through the crowd at lightning speed. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. He had spent years hearing rumors but had never paid attention to them. Now those rumors seemed to be standing right in front of him wearing formal clothes and smiling at a dessert table. One of the reporters quietly approached another guest. "Are those Olivia Carter's children?" The guest shook his head. "I have no idea." Another voice spoke nearby. "Then where have they been all these years?" No one had an answer. But before the night was over, one question would become even more important. If those children belonged to Olivia, then why had she spent 5 years keeping them hidden from Ryan Carter? The atmosphere inside the ballroom had completely changed. What had begun as a celebration of Ryan Carter's success was slowly becoming something else entirely. Clusters of guests stood whispering in corners. Reporters exchanged hurried notes. Even the musicians seemed distracted, watching the room more than their sheet music. Everywhere people looked, the same questions followed Olivia and the 3 children. Near the dessert table, the triplets were happily debating which pastry looked best while completely unaware of the storm surrounding them. Olivia watched them with a gentle smile. For her, they remained the most important people in the room. Not the politicians. Not the investors. Not the cameras. Her children. Alexander stood beside her, occasionally answering greetings from business leaders who approached to shake his hand. Despite his status, he seemed far more interested in listening to the triplets describe their favorite desserts than discussing investments. That detail did not go unnoticed. Across the ballroom, Ryan could barely focus on conversations. Every time he glanced toward Olivia, he found more people gathering around her. More attention. More curiosity. More respect. The exact opposite of what he had expected. Then the evening's master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before dinner is served, we would like to recognize several special guests." Applause followed. Spotlights swept gently across the ballroom. The host smiled toward the crowd. "Tonight, we are honored to welcome one of the nation's most influential entrepreneurs and philanthropists." Everyone knew exactly who he meant. Heads immediately turned toward Alexander. More applause erupted. Alexander offered a polite nod but remained seated. The host continued. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for joining us this evening." Then he smiled. "May I ask what brought you to our event?" The question seemed harmless. Yet the room instantly became quiet. Hundreds of eyes focused on Alexander. He stood calmly. "I am here because someone important to me received an invitation." Murmurs spread through the crowd. The host smiled. "Someone important?" Alexander glanced toward Olivia. The gesture lasted only a second. But everyone noticed. "Very important." The whispers intensified. Ryan felt a knot forming in his stomach. The host laughed politely. "Well, we are certainly glad you accepted." Then he looked toward the children nearby. "And it appears you brought family as well." The audience chuckled warmly. One of the triplets smiled and waved. More laughter followed. The moment felt lighthearted until a woman seated near the front raised her hand and spoke loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Those children are adorable." "How old are they?" Olivia answered politely. "They are 4. The woman smiled. "And who is their father?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Every sound in the ballroom seemed to disappear. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died instantly. Even the reporters froze. Olivia's expression remained calm, but Ryan felt the blood drain from his face. Vanessa slowly turned toward him. Alexander looked at Olivia without speaking. He did not rush to answer. He did not intervene. He simply trusted her. The triplets continued enjoying their desserts, blissfully unaware of the tension surrounding them. Dozens of guests leaned forward slightly. Waiting. Watching. Wondering. Olivia looked across the ballroom. Her eyes briefly met Ryan's. 5 years of silence seemed to pass between them in that single moment. Then she took a slow breath. Because the answer to that question was about to change everything. The silence seemed to stretch across the entire ballroom. Olivia stood calmly beside her children while hundreds of guests waited for an answer. The woman who had asked the question shifted slightly in her seat, perhaps realizing she had touched something deeply personal. Yet nobody looked away. Nobody resumed eating. The moment had become too important. Olivia glanced down at the triplets. One of the boys was carefully balancing a strawberry on the edge of a dessert spoon. The little girl was trying to convince her brothers that chocolate cake was superior to every other dessert in the room. Their innocence made Olivia smile. Then she looked back toward the crowd. Their father was a good man, she said softly. The answer surprised everyone. It was not what they expected. More importantly, it did not fully answer the question. Murmurs immediately spread across nearby tables. Ryan stared at her from across the room. His jaw tightened. Something about her choice of words unsettled him. The host shifted uncomfortably. Was? The single word escaped before he could stop himself. Olivia nodded. Yes. The ballroom became quiet again. She folded her hands calmly in front of her. Years ago, before these children were born, someone I cared about made a choice. A choice based on assumptions. Pride. Other people's opinions. Several guests glanced toward Ryan. The connection was becoming difficult to ignore. Olivia continued. Sometimes people believe they know an entire story after hearing only one chapter. Ryan felt dozens of eyes slowly turning toward him. Beside him, Vanessa sat perfectly still. Alexander remained silent, allowing Olivia to speak without interruption. His confidence in her seemed absolute. One of the triplets suddenly looked up. Mom? Olivia smiled warmly. Yes? Can we have another cookie? Soft laughter rippled through the room, breaking some of the tension. Olivia nodded. One more. The children immediately returned to their important discussion about desserts. The simple moment somehow made everything feel more real. More human. Then an older gentleman near the front stood up slowly. He was one of the Carter Foundation's largest donors and one of the few people old enough to remember Ryan and Olivia's marriage. Olivia, he said carefully, many of us were surprised when you disappeared after the divorce. Olivia looked at him politely. I know. People talked. A faint smile touched her lips. I know that too. The man hesitated before continuing. The rumors suggested you left because you could not handle the challenges of marriage. Several uncomfortable expressions appeared throughout the ballroom. Olivia's smile never faded. Rumors are often more popular than facts. The donor nodded thoughtfully. Then perhaps tonight is a good night for facts. That statement seemed to land heavily throughout the room. Reporters immediately raised their phones. Cameras shifted position. Even the musicians watched from the side of the stage. Ryan felt a growing sense of unease. The evening had slipped completely beyond his control. Olivia reached into her purse and removed a small folded document. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just a single piece of paper that looked worn from time. She held it for a moment before looking directly across the ballroom at Ryan. 5 years of silence stood between them. 5 years of assumptions. 5 years of stories told by people who were never present when the truth happened. Then Olivia spoke quietly. Ryan, do you remember the day our divorce became final? Ryan swallowed hard. Of course. Olivia nodded slowly. Then perhaps you also remember what happened 3 weeks later. For the first time all evening, Ryan's confidence disappeared completely. Ryan felt as though the room had suddenly become smaller. Olivia's question echoed in his mind. 3 weeks after the divorce. Of course he remembered. It had been a busy period. Business meetings. Public appearances. Endless conversations about his future. Yet the expression on Olivia's face told him there was something connected to that time he had never known. Across the ballroom, guests watched in complete silence. Even the reporters seemed afraid to interrupt. Olivia carefully unfolded the document in her hands. The paper had aged slightly over the years, its edges softened from being handled many times. 3 weeks after our divorce, she said calmly, I sat alone in a doctor's office. Ryan stared at her. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Olivia continued. I went there expecting a routine appointment. Her eyes briefly drifted toward the triplets, who were still happily enjoying desserts without understanding the significance of the moment. Then she looked back at Ryan. Instead, I received news that would change the rest of my life. The ballroom remained absolutely still. Olivia held up the document. This is a copy of that medical report. A collective breath seemed to pass through the crowd. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. Suddenly, he already knew where this story was going. He just did not want to believe it. Olivia's voice remained steady. That day, I learned I was pregnant. The words struck the room with the force of a thunderclap. Gasps erupted throughout the ballroom. Several guests covered their mouths in shock. Vanessa's face drained of color. One of the reporters nearly dropped her phone. Ryan stood frozen. His mind struggled to process what he had just heard. Pregnant. 3 weeks after the divorce. His eyes slowly moved toward the triplets standing beside the dessert table. The same children everyone had been staring at all night. The same children he had spent hours wondering about. Suddenly, they no longer seemed like strangers. Olivia looked directly at him. I called you. Ryan blinked. What? 3 times. Her voice remained calm. I left messages. The room became even quieter. Ryan searched his memory desperately. 5 years was a long time. But fragments began returning. Missed calls. Voicemails he never listened to. A period when he had been angry. Bitter. Determined to move on. Olivia lowered her eyes briefly. You never answered. No accusation. No anger. Somehow that made the statement even more painful. Across the room, several guests looked at Ryan differently now. Not with admiration. Not with respect. With questions. Olivia continued. A week later, I received a letter from your attorney requesting additional financial disclosures. Ryan closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered that. The divorce proceedings had become complicated near the end. Vanessa had insisted everything be handled aggressively. Olivia folded the document carefully. At that point, I understood something. She paused. You had already decided who I was. Ryan felt the weight of those words settle over him. Olivia smiled sadly. And nothing I said would change your mind. One of the triplets suddenly ran over and wrapped his arms around Olivia. She immediately knelt beside him and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. The simple tenderness of the moment only made the truth more powerful. Then she stood again and faced the crowd. So I made a decision. Her eyes met Ryan's one final time. I chose to raise my children surrounded by love instead of resentment. And for the first time all evening, Ryan realized that the person who had truly lost something after the divorce had never been Olivia. The silence that followed seemed almost impossible to break. Ryan stood motionless as the truth settled over the ballroom. 5 years. 5 years without knowing. 5 years during which 3 children had grown up without ever hearing his voice, seeing his face, or knowing his name. Around him, guests exchanged stunned glances. The story they thought they understood had completely fallen apart. Vanessa looked from Olivia to the children and back again. Her confident expression had vanished. For years she had repeated the same narrative to anyone willing to listen. Olivia had left. Olivia had failed. Olivia had chosen her own path. Now every assumption seemed painfully incomplete. One of the reporters finally found her voice. Are you saying Ryan never knew? The question hung in the air. Olivia answered honestly. I am saying I tried to tell him. No anger. No accusation. Just fact. Ryan lowered his eyes. The memory of those unanswered messages now felt impossible to ignore. Back then, he had convinced himself he was protecting his future. Protecting his pride. Protecting his version of the story. Now all he could see were the consequences. Near the dessert table, the triplets continued talking excitedly about cake flavors. Their laughter drifted softly through the room, creating a striking contrast to the emotional weight surrounding the adults. Alexander stepped forward for the first time since Olivia began speaking. His voice remained calm. The children have always known they were loved. Olivia glanced toward him gratefully. Several guests immediately noticed the deep respect between them. It was not performative. It was not for the cameras. It was genuine. A board member approached Olivia carefully. "You raised 3 children by yourself?" Olivia smiled softly. "Not entirely." She looked toward Alexander. "There were good people who helped along the way." The board member nodded. "Including Mr. Hayes?" A faint smile appeared on Alexander's face. "I met Olivia 3 years ago through a community education project." Murmurs spread again. People were beginning to understand. This was not a sudden appearance. Not a dramatic publicity stunt. There was history here. Real history. Real relationships. Another guest stepped forward. "Then why has nobody ever heard about this?" Olivia laughed quietly. "Because my children are not headlines." Several people lowered their eyes. The answer carried more wisdom than criticism. Across the ballroom, Ryan finally found his voice. "Why did you never try again?" The question escaped before he could stop himself. Olivia looked at him calmly. "I did." Ryan frowned. "What?" She opened her purse and removed another folded document. This one looked newer. More official. 2 years after the divorce, I sent a certified letter." Ryan stared at the paper. Olivia continued. "Your office signed for it." Vanessa slowly turned toward her son. Ryan looked genuinely confused. "I never saw any letter." Olivia nodded. "I know." That answer landed heavily. Someone had intercepted it. Someone had decided he did not need to know. Ryan's eyes moved toward his mother. Vanessa immediately looked away. The reaction was small. But dozens of people noticed it. For the first time all evening, a new possibility entered the room. Perhaps the story was even bigger than anyone realized. Olivia carefully returned the letter to her purse. Then she looked around the ballroom filled with reporters, donors, politicians, and social elites. "The truth has a strange habit," she said quietly. "It stays hidden for years. Then one day it decides it has waited long enough." And judging by the expressions throughout the room, that day had finally arrived. The revelation spread through the ballroom faster than any announcement ever could. Conversations erupted in every corner. Reporters quietly compared notes. Donors exchanged uneasy glances. The story that had once seemed so simple had become something entirely different. Ryan remained standing near the center of the room, surrounded by people yet somehow more alone than he had ever felt. Across from him, Olivia stood beside the triplets while Alexander remained at her side. The contrast could not have been clearer. One side was built on assumptions. The other on truth. An older member of the Carter Foundation board slowly approached the stage microphone. He had known Ryan's family for decades and was respected by nearly everyone in the room. "I believe," he said carefully, "that many of us owe Olivia an apology." The statement landed heavily. No one argued. No one laughed. Several guests lowered their eyes. They remembered the gossip. The whispers. The assumptions they had accepted without ever asking questions. Olivia seemed uncomfortable with the attention. She had not come seeking public vindication. Yet the room was beginning to understand that the woman they had dismissed for years possessed more dignity than most of them combined. Then another unexpected voice broke through the silence. She is right. Everyone turned. Vanessa Carter stood slowly from her chair. Her hands trembled slightly. For the first time all evening, the confidence she normally carried was gone. I did intercept the letter. Gasps spread through the ballroom. Ryan stared at his mother in disbelief. Vanessa swallowed hard. When the certified letter arrived, I opened it. The room became completely silent. I believed I was protecting my son. Her voice cracked. I thought Olivia wanted money. I thought she was trying to reopen a chapter that needed to stay closed. Ryan looked as though he had been struck by the confession. You told me nothing ever came. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. I know. Years of certainty suddenly collapsed around him. The unanswered messages. The missing letter. The story he had believed for half a decade. None of it was what he thought. Olivia remained quiet. She did not interrupt. She did not seek revenge. She simply allowed the truth to stand on its own. The board member looked toward Vanessa. And during all these years? Vanessa lowered her head. I said nothing. A heavy silence followed. Then one of the triplets wandered over holding a cookie. The little girl looked up at Olivia. Mom, why is everyone sad? The innocent question pierced through the tension. Olivia knelt beside her daughter and smiled gently. Because sometimes grown-ups take a very long time to understand things. The child considered that answer seriously before nodding. That seems silly. Soft laughter spread through the room. Even a few reporters smiled. The simplicity of her observation felt impossible to argue with. Olivia stood again and took her daughter's hand. Around the ballroom, people were no longer looking at her with pity. They were looking at her with respect. And for Ryan, that realization may have hurt more than any accusation ever could. Because the woman he invited to embarrass had not embarrassed herself at all. She had simply walked into the room and allowed everyone to see the truth. The ballroom felt different now. The tension had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. Earlier in the evening, people had gathered expecting entertainment at Olivia's expense. Now they stood quietly reflecting on how easily they had accepted a story that was never true. Ryan remained frozen near the center of the room. The applause and admiration that normally surrounded him had faded into the background. For the first time in years, he was confronting reality without excuses. Across the room, Olivia stood with the triplets and Alexander. The children had long since lost interest in adult conversations and were now fascinated by a decorative fountain near the ballroom entrance. Their laughter echoed softly through the room. It was a reminder that life had continued moving forward, regardless of old mistakes. Ryan slowly approached Olivia. Conversations immediately quieted. Reporters lowered their phones. Guests watched carefully. Nobody knew what he was about to say. When he finally stopped a few feet away, he seemed smaller somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. The confidence that had once defined him was gone. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Olivia studied him without speaking. Ryan looked down briefly before continuing. Not because everyone is watching. His voice wavered slightly. Because I should have said it years ago. The room remained silent. Ryan glanced toward the triplets. One of the boys was trying to explain fountain mechanics to his brother. The sight brought unexpected emotion to his face. I missed everything. The realization sounded almost painful. First words. First birthdays. First days of school. Hundreds of ordinary moments that could never be repeated. Olivia's expression softened, though sadness remained in her eyes. Yes, she said gently. Ryan nodded. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. There was nothing left to defend. After a long pause, he looked at Alexander. Thank you. The billionaire appeared genuinely surprised. Ryan continued. You were there when I was not. Alexander held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded respectfully. No rivalry. No triumph. Just acknowledgement. Around the ballroom, people seemed almost relieved by the absence of bitterness. The evening had delivered enough truth already. Then Olivia reached into her purse and removed the cream-colored invitation that had started everything. The same invitation Ryan had mailed weeks earlier. She unfolded it carefully. Guests immediately recognized it. Olivia looked at the handwritten message near the bottom. I hope life has been kind to you. Ryan remembered writing those words. At the time, he had believed they were clever. Looking back now, they felt painfully arrogant. Olivia turned the invitation over. On the back, she had written a single sentence in elegant blue ink. She handed it to him. Ryan read the words slowly. Life was kinder than you ever were. A faint gasp moved through the room. Not because the statement was cruel. Because it was true. Olivia's voice remained calm. The difference is that life eventually taught me forgiveness. Ryan stared at the note for several seconds. Then he folded the invitation carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. No defense. No argument. Just acceptance. Around them, the atmosphere shifted once again. The story that began with humiliation had ended with dignity. The woman everyone expected to embarrass had become the most respected person in the room. And as the evening moved toward its conclusion, one thing had become impossible to deny. Olivia Carter had never needed revenge. The truth had done all the work for her. 1 year later, the memory of that gala still lingered in the minds of everyone who had attended. Not because of the decorations, the speeches, or the headlines that followed, but because it had revealed something people rarely witnessed anymore. The truth. On a bright spring afternoon, Olivia stood near the edge of a soccer field while the triplets raced across the grass with boundless energy. Parents cheered from folding chairs. Children laughed beneath a cloudless blue sky. It was an ordinary day. And after everything that had happened, Olivia had learned to appreciate ordinary days more than anything else. Alexander sat beside her holding a paper cup of coffee. I think your daughter just convinced half the team to change their strategy, he said with a smile. Olivia laughed. That sounds about right. Nearby, the little girl was enthusiastically directing her brothers and several teammates as though she had been born to lead. The boys listened with varying levels of enthusiasm. Some things never changed. Across the field, a familiar figure approached slowly. Ryan. The first few meetings after the gala had been awkward. Painful at times. There was no shortcut around 5 years of missed birthdays, missed school plays, and missed memories. But Ryan had made a choice. Instead of demanding forgiveness, he earned trust one small step at a time. One visit. One conversation. One promise kept. The triplets spotted him almost immediately. Ryan is here, one of the boys shouted. They ran toward him with the enthusiasm only children could possess. Olivia watched quietly as Ryan knelt to greet them. There was still sadness in moments like these. There always would be. But there was also healing. And healing mattered more. Alexander looked toward Olivia. You built something remarkable. Olivia followed his gaze toward the children laughing together in the sunlight. We all did. Her answer was simple because it was true. The years had taught her that happiness rarely arrived in the form people expected. Sometimes it appeared disguised as disappointment. Sometimes it arrived after heartbreak. Sometimes it walked through the front door carrying 3 children and a future nobody saw coming. As the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the field, the triplets gathered around Olivia and Alexander while Ryan joined them nearby. For a moment, nobody spoke. They simply enjoyed the warmth of the day and the sound of children laughing. Olivia thought back to the invitation that had started everything. The invitation meant to embarrass her. The invitation that became the doorway to the truth. life had indeed been kind to her. Not because it had been easy. Not because it had been fair. But because it had given her the courage to keep moving forward when every reason existed to give up. She looked at her children. She looked at Alexander. Then she smiled. The people who once judged her had measured success by wealth, status, and appearances. Olivia had discovered a better measure. Love. Family. Integrity. And as the triplets raced across the field again beneath the bright American sky, she knew she already possessed everything that truly mattered.